The emergency broadcast had stopped 3 hours ago, and that silence terrified Marcus Reed more than any of the screaming had. He pressed his face against the cold glass of the television station's fourth-floor window, watching the chaos unfold on the streets of downtown Minneapolis below. Fires burned unchecked in the distance, casting an orange glow against the darkening sky, while abandoned cars sat motionless in the middle of intersections, their doors hanging open like broken wings. The infected wandered between them with that distinctive jerking gait that had become horrifyingly familiar over the past 72 hours. Marcus had been a news producer for 15 years, had covered every disaster imaginable, but nothing had prepared him for this. Behind him, the station's backup generator hummed steadily, a small mercy in a world rapidly losing power. Jennifer Walsh, the station's lead anchor who had delivered the final broadcast before the network went dark, sat hunched over a desk with her perfectly styled blonde hair now disheveled and her makeup smeared from crying. Beside her, Tommy Rodriguez, the youngest cameraman on staff, frantically scrolled through his phone, still hoping for some signal, some message from his family in St. Paul. "We can't stay here forever," Marcus said, his voice cutting through the oppressive quiet of the newsroom. "The generator has maybe 2 days of fuel left and then we're in the dark." Jennifer looked up, her blue eyes red-rimmed but defiant. "And go where exactly? Down there with those things? I saw what they did to Derek when he tried to make it to his car. I watched it happen on the security feed." Her voice cracked on their colleague's name and Tommy flinched at the memory. Derek Patterson had been their chief editor, a good man with 3 kids waiting at home, and he died screaming in the parking garage while they watched helplessly from above. Marcus turned away from the window and surveyed their makeshift refuge. The newsroom had seemed so spacious before, but now it felt like a cage. 6 people had been in the building when everything fell apart, but now only the 3 of them remained. Bill Henderson from security had suffered a heart attack on day 1, the stress too much for his 70-year-old heart. The 2 interns, Katie and Josh, had left together yesterday morning, convinced they could make it to the National Guard checkpoint that had been announced before communications went completely silent. No one had heard from them since. "There was another broadcast," Tommy said suddenly, looking up from his phone. "I picked it up on the AM radio in Studio B. Someone's organizing survivors at the Riverside Medical Center about 8 miles from here. They're calling it a safe zone, saying they have doctors, supplies, and military protection." Jennifer laughed bitterly. "Military protection? Tommy, the military couldn't even protect themselves. I reported on 3 bases being overrun before we lost contact with our correspondents." Marcus felt the weight of leadership settling on his shoulders, a burden he'd never wanted. He was a behind-the-scenes guy, someone who told others what stories to cover, not someone who had to make life-or-death decisions. But someone had to decide, and he was the oldest one here at 43. "We need information before we make any moves," he said carefully. "Tommy, can you get to the traffic cameras? See if any of them are still operational? I want to know what the route to Riverside looks like." As Tommy nodded and headed toward the technical booth, Marcus caught Jennifer's eye. She stood up slowly, smoothing down her blazer in a gesture that was pure instinct, a remnant of normalcy in an abnormal world. "You think there's really a safe zone?" she asked quietly. Marcus didn't answer immediately. Through the window behind him, the moans of the infected rose in a discordant chorus, a sound that had replaced the usual city traffic. The world had fallen silent in so many ways, no sirens, no airplanes overhead, no distant rumble of trains, but it had also become unbearably loud with new terrors. "I think we have to hope there is," he finally replied. "Because hope might be the only thing we have left." Tommy's fingers flew across the keyboard in the technical booth, his eyes reflecting the blue glow of multiple monitors as he cycled through the city's traffic camera network. Most of the feeds showed nothing but static, their connections severed when the infrastructure began collapsing, but a few still functioned, offering glimpses into the nightmare that Minneapolis had become. Marcus stood behind him, arms crossed, while Jennifer paced nervously near the door. "Got something on camera 47, Tommy muttered, pulling up a feed that showed the intersection of 5th and Hennepin. The image was grainy but clear enough to see dozens of infected crowding the streets, their bodies swaying as they moved without purpose, waiting for something to hunt. One of them wore a police uniform, another was dressed in a hospital gown, and Marcus felt his stomach turn as he recognized the fundamental truth they'd all been avoiding. These things weren't monsters from another world, they were people who had lost everything that made them human. What about the route to Riverside? Marcus asked, forcing himself to focus. Tommy switched through several cameras, creating a makeshift path through the city. East on 7th Street is completely blocked, there's a pileup near the bridge. But if we go south to the warehouse district and cut through the industrial park, it looks relatively clear. Most of the infected seem to be concentrated in the residential areas and downtown. Jennifer stopped pacing. That's because that's where the people were. They're drawn to where the living used to be. She'd covered enough of the initial outbreak to understand the patterns. The infected were attracted to sound, to movement, to anything that reminded them of the prey they'd once been. A sudden crash echoed through the building and all three of them froze. The sound had come from below, from somewhere on the 1st or 2nd floor. Marcus held up his hand, signaling for silence, and they listened. At first, there was nothing but the hum of the generator and their own breathing, but then it came again, the distinctive sound of glass breaking, followed by a low, guttural moan. "They're inside," Jennifer whispered, her face going pale. Tommy immediately switched to the building's internal security cameras. The lobby camera showed 4 infected stumbling through the shattered remains of the front entrance. They must have finally broken through the barricade that Bill Henderson had constructed on that first day. The creatures moved slowly, their heads turning as if sensing something above them. "The stairwell," Marcus said urgently. "Did we block it?" Tommy nodded quickly. "Bill and I pushed a filing cabinet and 2 desks against the 3rd-floor door. It should hold unless they really start pushing." But even as he said it, they heard another sound, footsteps, shuffling and uneven but definitely ascending. The infected had found the stairs. Marcus's mind raced through their options. They had maybe an hour before those things figured out how to get through their barricade, maybe less. The 4th floor had no other exits except the main stairwell and the emergency fire escape on the east side of the building. "We need to leave now," he said, his decision made. "While we still can." "Tommy, is that fire escape clear?" Tommy pulled up the exterior camera, angling it toward the side of the building. The alley below appeared empty, just a dumpster and some scattered trash. "Looks good, but I can't see around the corner. There could be 100 of them just out of frame." Jennifer grabbed a backpack they'd prepared earlier, stuffed with water bottles and whatever food they'd scavenged from the break room vending machines. "So we're really doing this? We're going out there?" Marcus looked at both of them, these 2 people who had become his responsibility by circumstance rather than choice. Jennifer Walsh, who'd once interviewed presidents and covered wars from safe hotel rooms, now looked like a frightened survivor from one of her own news reports. Tommy Rodriguez, barely 24 years old, who should have been worrying about student loans and dating apps instead of evading the undead. "We don't have a choice anymore," Marcus said, moving toward the equipment room where they'd stored a few improvised weapons. A baseball bat from the rec room, a fire extinguisher, a letter opener that Jennifer had sharpened against the concrete wall. "The choice is whether we leave on our terms or wait for those things to make it for us." Below them, the moaning grew louder, and something heavy slammed against a door. The sound echoed through the stairwell like a countdown clock, marking the end of their temporary sanctuary. The fire escape rattled under their weight as Marcus led the way down, each metal step creaking loud enough to wake the dead, an expression that now carried a terrible new meaning. He gripped the baseball bat in his right hand while his left clung to the rusted railing, his knuckles white with tension. Above him, Jennifer descended carefully in her impractical heels, which she'd refused to abandon despite Marcus's protests, while Tommy brought up the rear, the heavy camera he'd insisted on carrying slung across his back. "Why are we going down so slowly?" Jennifer hissed, but Marcus knew why. Every instinct screamed at him to rush, to run, but hasty movements made noise, and noise meant death. The alley below remained eerily quiet, but he could hear the infected inside the building now, their moans echoing through the walls like some twisted choir. They were 1 floor below the newsroom, maybe less, and the barricade wouldn't hold much longer. Marcus's foot touched solid ground, and he immediately pressed himself against the wall, scanning the alley in both directions. To the left, the alley opened onto 4th Street where he could see the silhouettes of infected wandering in the fading daylight. To the right, a chain-link fence blocked the path, but beyond it lay the loading dock of an old warehouse that looked abandoned. "Fence or street?" Tommy whispered, landing beside him. Before Marcus could answer, a door burst open 20 feet to their left, and a man stumbled out into the alley. He was alive, definitely alive, his eyes wide with terror and his shirt soaked with sweat. Blood covered his hands, but he was running with purpose, looking back over his shoulder. "Help me!" the man shouted, and Marcus felt his heart sink even as he recognized the voice. It was Paul Donovan, one of the station's senior reporters who had left 2 days ago to find his daughter. Behind Paul, 3 infected crashed through the doorway in pursuit, their movements jerky but determined. Paul ran toward them and Marcus raised the baseball bat, knowing what had to happen next but hating it nonetheless. The fence. Go for the fence. Marcus yelled to Jennifer and Tommy, then turned to face the approaching chaos. Paul reached them first, gasping for breath, his face a mask of desperation. They're everywhere. I couldn't find her. I couldn't find Emma. The first infected was close behind, a woman in a tattered business suit with half her face torn away. Marcus swung the bat with all his strength, connecting with her skull with a sickening crunch that sent vibrations up his arms. She went down but the other 2 kept coming. Tommy appeared beside him, wielding the fire extinguisher like a club. He slammed it into the nearest infected, a teenage boy whose blank eyes showed no recognition of the pain he should have felt. The creature stumbled backward but didn't fall. Marcus, come on. Jennifer screamed from the fence, where she'd somehow managed to climb despite her heels, now dangling from one hand. Paul had already started climbing, his survival instinct overriding everything else. The third infected lunged at Marcus and he barely dodged, feeling rotten fingers brush against his jacket. Tommy sprayed the fire extinguisher directly into its face, and the creature reeled back, giving them precious seconds. They ran for the fence, Marcus's lungs burning as adrenaline flooded his system. He could hear more moans now, drawn by Paul's shouts and the commotion. The infected from 4th Street were turning toward the alley, a shuffling mass of maybe a dozen or more. Tommy went up the fence like a spider, his youth and athleticism serving him well. Marcus followed, the chain link biting into his fingers as he climbed. Below him, hands grabbed at his leg and he kicked frantically, feeling his shoe connect with something soft. He hauled himself over the top and dropped to the other side, landing hard on the concrete and rolling. Pain shot through his shoulder but he forced himself up. They were in the warehouse loading area now, a wide open space surrounded by tall buildings. Paul was already running toward a delivery truck parked near the loading dock, trying the doors desperately. Locked, he shouted. Jennifer pointed toward a half-open rolling door that led into the warehouse itself. In there. We can cut through. Behind them, the infected were climbing the fence now, their bodies pressing against it, some falling back but others managing to grip the chain link and pull themselves up with mindless determination. Marcus made the decision in a split second. The warehouse. Move. They sprinted across the loading area as the first infected tumbled over the fence behind them. The rolling door was rusted and reluctant, but Tommy grabbed the bottom and hauled it up another 2 feet, creating an opening just large enough to slide through. One by one they scrambled into the darkness beyond, and Marcus turned for one last look at the world outside before Tommy pulled the door down with a thunderous crash that sealed them in complete and utter darkness. The darkness inside the warehouse was absolute, a suffocating blackness that pressed against Marcus's eyes like a physical weight. He could hear the others breathing around him, short panicked gasps that echoed in the vast empty space, and beyond the rolling door the infected clawed and moaned, their fingers scraping against metal in a rhythm that set his teeth on edge. Lights, Tommy whispered, and a moment later the beam from his phone cut through the darkness, revealing towering shelves stacked with cardboard boxes and industrial equipment covered in dust. Marcus pulled out his own phone, adding another thin beam to the gloom, and Jennifer did the same, her hands shaking so badly that her light danced across the walls like a strobe. Paul Donovan stood apart from them, his back against a support pillar, his chest heaving as he struggled to catch his breath. In the phone light, Marcus could see the reporter more clearly now. His expensive suit was torn and filthy, his usually perfect hair matted with grime and something darker that might have been blood. "Paul," Marcus said carefully, approaching him like he might a wounded animal. "What happened? Where have you been?" Paul looked up, and his eyes held a wildness that Marcus didn't like. "I found her," he said, his voice cracking. "I found Emma. She was at her mother's apartment, just like I thought. But I was too late. She had already turned." The words hung in the air, heavy with grief, and Jennifer made a small sound of sympathy. Marcus wanted to offer comfort, but there was no comfort left in the world, only survival. "I'm sorry," Marcus said, and he meant it. "But we need to keep moving. This warehouse isn't safe. We need to find another exit." Tommy was already moving deeper into the building, his camera light sweeping across the space. "There's an office area in the back, I can see windows. Maybe another way out." They followed him, weaving between shelves and pallets, their footsteps echoing too loudly in the cavernous space. Marcus kept glancing back at Paul, who followed mechanically, his expression blank. Grief did strange things to people, and in this new world, strange could quickly become dangerous. The office area was a glass-enclosed section built into the back corner of the warehouse, probably where supervisors once watched over workers. Tommy tried the door, unlocked, and they filed inside, grateful for the barrier between them and the vast darkness beyond. Through the grimy windows, Marcus could see streetlights flickering in the distance, and beyond them, the distinctive shape of the Riverside Medical Center's tower rising against the twilight sky. 8 miles. It might as well have been 800. "We need a vehicle," Jennifer said, stating the obvious as she collapsed into a dusty office chair. "We'll never make it on foot. Not with them out there." Tommy moved to a filing cabinet and started pulling open drawers, searching for anything useful. "There might be keys here. Companies usually keep spares for their fleet vehicles." Paul spoke suddenly from the doorway, his voice flat and emotionless. "I have a car. 2 blocks from here in a parking garage on 6th. I left it there when I couldn't drive any further through the streets." Marcus felt a flicker of hope, the first he'd experienced in hours. "Can you get us to it?" Paul nodded slowly, then reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a gun, a small revolver that looked old but functional. Marcus hadn't known Paul carried a weapon, hadn't known that the sophisticated reporter who won awards for his investigative journalism had it in him to survive alone for 2 days in hell. "I can get us there," Paul said. "But I need something from you first." The air in the office suddenly felt thicker, more dangerous. Marcus's hand tightened on the baseball bat, his instincts screaming warnings. "What do you need?" Paul's eyes moved from Marcus to Jennifer to Tommy, assessing each of them. "I need to know that you won't leave me behind. When things get bad, and they will get bad, I need to know that I matter to someone. Because Emma mattered to me and now she's gone, and I need a reason to keep going." The vulnerability in his voice was raw and painful, but the gun in his hand told a different story, one about a man on the edge of breaking. Marcus understood then that they'd gained a potential ally but also a liability, someone whose grip on sanity was as tenuous as their grip on survival. "We stick together," Marcus said firmly, meeting Paul's eyes. "All of us. That's the only way any of us make it." Paul stared at him for a long moment, then nodded and lowered the gun, sliding it back into his jacket. Tommy exhaled loudly, not bothering to hide his relief. Outside, night was falling fast, and with it came new dangers. The infected were more active in the darkness, more aggressive, as if the absence of light freed something primal in whatever remained of their brains. They had maybe 30 minutes before full dark, 30 minutes to cross 2 blocks of infected-filled streets to reach a car that might not even start. They left through the warehouse's side entrance, a rusted metal door that opened onto an alley choked with overturned garbage bins and abandoned shopping carts. The sun had nearly disappeared below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of purple and orange that would have been beautiful in any other circumstance, but now only served as a countdown to darkness. Marcus checked both directions, his baseball bat ready, while Paul stood beside him with the revolver drawn, his finger resting carefully outside the trigger guard. 6th and Morrison, Paul whispered, pointing northeast. "The parking garage is the tall concrete structure. My car's on the 3rd level, a blue Honda Accord." Tommy adjusted the backpack he'd transferred the supplies into, having finally abandoned his camera in the warehouse office after Jennifer practically begged him to leave it behind. 2 blocks doesn't sound so bad, he said, but his voice lacked conviction. Marcus had seen the traffic camera feeds, knew what 2 blocks really meant in this new world. They moved in a tight formation, Marcus and Paul in front, Jennifer and Tommy behind, each step measured and quiet. The first block was residential, old brownstone apartments with fire escapes zigzagging down their facades, windows dark and lifeless. A child's bicycle lay on its side in the middle of the sidewalk, one wheel still spinning slowly in the breeze, and Marcus forced himself not to think about what had happened to its owner. They were halfway down the block when they saw the first infected, an elderly man in pajamas standing motionless in a doorway, his head cocked at an unnatural angle. He hadn't noticed them yet, his attention focused on something inside the building, and Marcus signaled for everyone to move slowly past. They were almost clear when Jennifer's phone rang. The sound shattered the silence like a gunshot, a cheerful pop melody that belonged to a world that no longer existed. Jennifer scrambled to silence it, her face horror-stricken, but the damage was done. The elderly infected's head snapped toward them, and his mouth opened to release a moan that sounded like a dinner bell to every creature within earshot. "Run!" Marcus shouted, abandoning stealth for speed. They sprinted down the sidewalk as infected emerged from buildings and alleys, drawn by the sound like moths to flame. Behind them, Marcus could hear the growing crowd, their moans overlapping into a cacophony that chased them through the twilight. Paul ran ahead, surprisingly fast for a man in his 50s, his gun still in hand but unfired. They rounded the corner onto 6th Street, and the parking garage loomed before them, its entrance gaping open like a cave mouth. A delivery van sat abandoned halfway through the entrance, its doors hanging open, and beyond it, the ramp spiraled upward into shadow. They didn't slow down, couldn't slow down, not with the infected pouring around the corner behind them. Marcus risked a glance back and saw at least 20 of them, maybe more, stumbling and running with that horrible jerking gait that was somehow faster than it should be. They squeezed past the delivery van and hit the ramp, their footsteps echoing off concrete walls. The parking garage amplified every sound, turning their breathing into a symphony of desperation. First level, mostly empty, just a few abandoned cars with doors left open and contents scattered. Second level, more of the same but darker, the overhead lights flickering intermittently. Third level, Paul veered left, leading them through rows of vehicles toward the far corner. There, he gasped, pointing at a blue sedan that looked miraculously intact. But between them and the car stood a problem. A group of infected, maybe 6 or 7, clustered around something on the ground. They looked up as the survivors approached, their faces pale in the dim light, blood darkening their clothes. Marcus didn't hesitate. He charged forward, bat swinging, and caught the nearest one across the jaw with a crack that echoed through the garage. Tommy followed his lead, tackling another infected and shoving it toward the concrete barrier. Paul fired the revolver twice, the shots deafening in the enclosed space, and 2 infected dropped. Jennifer screamed, not in fear but in rage, and slammed her sharpened letter opener into the eye socket of an infected woman who'd grabbed her arm. They fought with the desperation of people who knew this was their last chance, and for a moment, Marcus felt something like pride in these people who had become his family by necessity. The infected from downstairs were coming up the ramp now, their moans growing louder, and Paul was already at the car, fumbling with his keys. "Get in! Get in!" he yelled, and Marcus heard the blessed sound of locks disengaging. They piled into the vehicle, Tommy and Jennifer in the back, Marcus in the passenger seat, and Paul behind the wheel. He turned the key and the engine turned over once, twice, then died. "No, no, no," Paul muttered, trying again. The infected reached the car, hands slapping against windows, faces pressing against glass, their breath fogging the exterior. Paul turned the key again, pumping the gas, and the engine coughed, sputtered, then roared to life. He slammed the car into reverse, tires squealing as he backed away from the infected, then shifted into drive and accelerated toward the exit ramp, scattering bodies in their wake. The Honda Accord screamed down empty streets, weaving between abandoned vehicles as Paul drove with single-minded focus, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. Marcus gripped the dashboard, his eyes scanning the road ahead for obstacles while behind them, Jennifer and Tommy held onto each other as the car bounced over debris. The Riverside Medical Center tower grew larger with each passing block, a beacon of hope rising above the chaos, and Marcus allowed himself to believe just for a moment that they might actually make it. "There's a checkpoint ahead," Paul said, slowing the vehicle as they approached a makeshift barricade constructed from concrete barriers and military vehicles. Figures moved behind the fortifications, and Marcus's heart leaped when he saw they were living people, armed soldiers in uniform who raised their weapons cautiously as the Honda approached. Paul stopped the car 50 feet from the checkpoint and slowly raised his hands, visible through the windshield. A voice boomed through a megaphone, mechanical and stern. "Exit the vehicle slowly. Keep your hands where we can see them." They complied, climbing out with deliberate movements, and Marcus saw at least a dozen rifles trained on them from behind the barricade. A soldier approached, a young woman with sergeant stripes on her sleeve and exhaustion written across her face. She kept her rifle ready but not aimed directly at them. "Anyone bit? Anyone injured?" she called out. "We're clean," Marcus answered. "We came from the news station on 4th Street. We heard the broadcast about a safe zone." The sergeant studied them for a long moment, her eyes lingering on the blood splattered across their clothes, then gestured to her team. "Check them." 2 medics came forward with flashlights and began examining each of them, looking for bites or scratches that would mean infection and death. Marcus submitted to the inspection, watching as the Riverside Medical Center loomed behind the checkpoint, its windows blazing with light powered by what must have been industrial generators. When they were cleared, the sergeant's demeanor softened slightly. "You're lucky. We're closing the gates in an hour. After that, nobody gets in or out." Too many infected gathering around the perimeter. She led them through the checkpoint, and Marcus felt the weight of the past 3 days begin to lift as they passed into the safe zone. The medical center's parking lot had been transformed into a refugee camp, with military tents erected in rows and people, actual living people, moving between them. Children played under watchful eyes, couples held each other, and elderly survivors sat in folding chairs sharing stories. It wasn't the world they'd lost, but it was something, a fragile island of humanity in a sea of death. Jennifer started crying, not from fear this time but from relief, and Tommy put his arm around her shoulders, his own eyes glistening. Paul stood apart, looking at the families gathered in the camp, and Marcus saw the pain of loss etched across his face, the knowledge that his daughter would never be part of this second chance. Marcus approached him, placing a hand on the reporter's shoulder. "You got us here," he said quietly. "Emma would be proud of what you did today." Paul nodded, unable to speak, and Marcus understood that grief was a journey that would take longer than the 8 miles they traveled. A woman in a Red Cross vest approached with clipboards, directing them toward processing tents where they'd be assigned shelter, given food and water, and integrated into the community that had formed in the wake of catastrophe. As they walked toward their new temporary home, Marcus looked back at the checkpoint and the darkness beyond it, where the infected still roamed through the silent city. The world had fallen, but it hadn't ended. Not completely. Not yet. In the distance, he could hear generators humming, people talking, someone playing a guitar in one of the tents. These were the sounds of survival, of humanity refusing to surrender to the darkness. Marcus thought about the broadcast that had brought them here, about hope being a destination worth dying for, and realized that hope wasn't just about believing in rescue or safety, it was about believing that even in the worst moments, people could still choose to help each other, to fight together, to remain human when everything else had become monstrous. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new dangers, and questions about how long any safe zone could last in a world overrun by the infected. But tonight, for the first time since the world fell silent, Marcus Reed allowed himself to hope that maybe, just maybe, the human spirit was stronger than the fear that had tried to consume it. And in a world where hope had become the rarest commodity of all, that was enough. Word count, 765. The end.